Hello, imaginary friends, and welcome to the Imaginaries Literary Podcast. Today we have a special guest, Brandon McNulty. He's the author of Half Murders and Bad Parts, and also Entry Wounds, which I've read and which is great. You should check it out. He's also a YouTuber pro, where his latest video, Bad Comic Relief versus Good Comic Relief, is awesome. You got to check it out. He just released it. So today we welcome Brandon, and we're just going to talk to him. So welcome, Brandon. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I've been a follower of yours for a couple of years now, and I love it. I love your style. I love how you give us information and stuff. And I'm really curious, just like, how did you get started in writing? What was your what was the beginning of that?
I guess it goes all the way back to when I was a kid, because I'm an only child. So when I grew up, I was all by myself and just playing with my action figures and stuff like that. And you know, you have a Spider-Man and a Hulk, and you're bashing them together. Eventually, you get bored of just hitting them. So at some point, you start developing a story, and you know, you start building around it, and then all of a sudden the couch is like a building and stuff like that. And I mean, that's just like the earliest stuff.
Sure.
And then as I got a little older, like I was 6-7 years old, I really loved to draw. And
nice.
Whenever they had like indoor recess in grade school, sometimes they'd give us like a piece of paper we could draw on everything, and I used to fold it together and make it like almost like a greeting card, and I would tell like this essentially like a 3-act story where it would be like something's happening on the front page, then on the second page there's something else, and then there's a conclusion on the third. Nice. And that was essentially like the where it all started.
Yeah.
But I think as far as where I actually sat down and wrote something, that wasn't until I was probably around 14 years old. We had been given an assignment for class. We had to write, I guess, a story or a piece of fiction or something like that. And I wrote a ripoff of something from Legend of Zelda. Like, okay. It was like at the time, I mean, Ocarina of Time was like my everything back then. Mm-hmm. So
right on.
We had to write like this 2-page story or something like that, and I thought like, oh man, this is gonna be so cool, it's gonna be so good, it's just gonna be like the best thing you've ever read. And I ended up writing this story about like this swordsman just running up a red carpet and attacking this king and killing him, and that was the whole plot. That was it. There was no dilemma, there was nothing. He just ran up there and killed him, and then that was the story. But it was interesting because that was the first time I actually sat down and tried to write something fictional.
Yeah.
And it looks so easy when you're reading a book, like something you love, whether it's when you're a kid reading R.L. Stine or when you're an adult reading Stephen King, whatever it is, it looks like, oh, you could do this, no problem. But when you actually get there and you're trying to figure out like, okay, why is this boring? Why is nothing, why is this not clicking the same way as other stories like that? And that's where I kind of got discouraged, and I also got interested in it as well. And It wasn't until a few years later that I started actually digging in and really writing my own stories and stuff like that. And I think I had always been pretty naturally good with like writing in general, like writing an essay or whatever it was. So it was kind of a natural jump to fiction, where I had a situation where, okay, I just need to figure out how I'm going to make up this story about events that aren't real. Yeah. But like the writing itself, like the words on the page, I was always pretty solid with grammar. And then like once I got to college, that was when I really bunkered down and started actually writing stories and started thinking like, wow, this is something I really enjoy. I want to do intensively over the course of time.
Mm-hmm. So when you got to college is when you really were like, oh, I can write stories, I can do this. That's like the revelation. Was it somebody who pushed you? Was it somebody like saying, hey, this is actually really good? Or was it just like a realization that you had yourself?
It was interesting because I went to college. I started as a pre-med major, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor and everything like that. And
that's college for you.
The world is a much safer place after I chose. I mean,
your parents are probably very angry, but
well,
it's
yeah. But I mean, like, a lot of lives have been saved because of my decision. So, but the thing is, that first semester in college, I was so miserable, and I had a chemistry course and a biology course, and I was crushing them, but I was just completely miserable.
Yeah.
And I also had an effective writing course, and it was like kind of like my outlet. And there was, I think the first assignment was we had to write a narrative. It could be nonfiction, it could be memoir, it could be fiction, and like everyone in the class was like, "Oh, I'm going to write about my summer," and I'm like, I'm going to write about somebody getting assassinated. And then that was like...
a king being killed by some dude that ran over red carpet.
I developed. I got better.
Same story, but now there's a reason.
Yeah, I know. There's actual stakes and details. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But at the time, I was a huge fan of the TV series 24, and I loved the style of it and the pacing and the stakes and, like all that kind of stuff. And I had... this idea like, oh, I'm going to write a story like that. And it was, I probably from watching that show so much, I had internalized like the dramatic timing from it, and like pulling off a plot twist, and having an image cut at the right time and stuff like that. And when I submitted it to my teacher, she gave me an A, and she's like, I want you to develop this. And I never did, but I mean, like, it was just the words of encouragement went a long way.
Yeah.
And then by the end of that semester, I dropped pre-med, and then I just kind of went, I think I was just undecided for another semester. And during that undecided semester, I took another creative writing class, and that was an interesting time, because the creative writing teacher, she and I are really good friends right now, but like at the time, she kind of looked down on me a little bit. Like it was a situation. Like no, she's a good teacher, but I mean, she like
it happens.
There was but like I think we had early on in the semester, we were supposed to have this thing where it was like they would figure out, okay, how. What type of writing is best for you? And the options were like poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction. And of course, I wanted fiction.
Yeah.
So we had to write, I think, 10 different things and submit them, and they were in the different areas and stuff like that. And I remember she called me up to her desk that day, and she's like, Brandon, I think you're best suited for creative nonfiction. And like that was like a stab to the heart. It was just... And because it was like I was so intent on writing fiction, and she's just like, I don't really think you're a fiction guy. And what happened was like that really lit a fire under me. And for the last assignment of the quarter, or for the last assignment of the semester, it was supposed to be like this 3 to 5 page short story, and I wrote her a 20-page short story just to like say like, hey, you are wrong about me. And she ended up signing me into her advanced course the following semester, and that was it was like just a huge thing. Like, but I mean, like I think that's a key thing when every writer is going to face rejection, or they're going to face some kind of issue along the way where they get tripped up, and like it's like, oh no, what happens, and like how am I gonna respond to this, and how you respond is so critical. And I'm wondering, like, have you guys, have you had any particular moments where you had like a situation like that where you got knocked to the ground and then you had to pick yourself up and write something great? Like, have you encountered that in your journey at all?
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely multiple places in my life where it was like, oh no, you're not going to do this. Like, so all three of us are former filmmakers, like Timothy, Daniel, and I. We were in the film industry, and before I even got into the film industry, it was like, you'll never make it in the film industry. And I was like, well, but come on, like, please, come on. And so then I started, like, I chose a different path. I started like doing journalism, and I absolutely hated it. And it's just like, like you, it's like a shot to the heart, because it's like, I want to make films, I want to tell great stories. And they're like, no, just tell like real stories, or like almost like document what's happening, which documentaries are fantastic, and I still love working on them. But like, I wanted to do movies. All I wanted to do was movies and tell really cool stories that like affected people like they affected me. And people were just like, nah, you'll never make it in the industry. And I was like, well, screw you.
Was it because you were too nice? Like, what? Like, how do you make that judgment about someone?
Well, I've gotten that so many times where it's like, no, you got to be, because I'm still in the industry, like I'm a creative producer right now. So I travel around and I do national commercials and documentaries and stuff. And like one of the biggest notes that I get from producers that I work with is like, you're too nice. You need to be a meaner director. And I'm like, I get everything I need by being a nice guy. I don't need to be a jerk. Like, not everybody has to be that mean, like overbearing director. It's like, I can, you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. So like, let me get these flies. Like, come on. So I got that, and then like in college, I was writing a lot, and I actually had a lot of encouragement when I started making films instead of working on journalism. So like there was this one semester where I was taking a course, and they were like, well, your last project has to be either a written story, a like live news story, or you can make a music video. And I was like, I'm making that freaking music video. I am so sick and tired of journalism. And so I made a music video, and the head of the department sent it in, unbeknownst to me, and I won a national award for it. Oh, nice. And I was like,
that's cool.
I was like, whoa, dang, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Then he came to me later.
I love that guy
the next semester, like the beginning. I know, me too. I was like, I still love him. He's awesome. His name is Steve Keeler. He's amazing. He came to me the beginning of the next semester and was like, hey, I'm putting together a team. And we're going to make a documentary, and I want you to head it up. And I was like, okay, like I don't know what I'm doing. And we worked together, and we finished the documentary, and we won 5 national awards for that. And I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing for my life. I am going for movies. Like I'm dropping out of everything that is journalism. I'm going for movies. And I did. And I like jumped on movie sets and just like started working my way up, and it was like the rest is history. So I get that. I totally get that. And it's like, like you're talking to me, and you're like, it's all about the choices that you make. It's like that's a story. Like those are what stories are. The best stories are the ones when the people make those good decisions. They get knocked down, and then they get up again. And
don't quote that song.
They move on with what they're supposed to go. Not
okay.
the song.
Okay.
Not the song. No, not the song, but the stories. So, but yeah, I love that. I love your story, man. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up awards and winning. Yeah. Even when it's something small that nobody really cares about, it still means something to you if you you invested the time in submitting to it, or just doing that work, whatever it is, and you get recognized for it. That is a huge confidence booster, and that's something. Like it's not just in the moment big, but when you hit those dark times, when you fall hard, you have something to fall back on and say like, okay, well, things are not working out now, but 3 years ago, I was a runner-up in that contest, or I was a finalist in that contest, or I got that short story published, or whatever it was. And it's so critical to have, just some kind of tangible thing that you can look at and say, like, okay, I am capable of writing. I can keep doing this. I can get better.
Yeah. So were you winning awards? Were you getting those kinds of things?
I was very, getting signed into that advanced class was like a good first step. And then in that class, I wrote a story. It was like a short story about a guy who was like posing as a Make-A-Wish fundraiser, and he was like conning people out of money and stuff. Nice. And it was a lot of fun to write, and I ended up writing that story. And there was another one about an obituary writer. It was kind of dark, and and
I like that.
I submitted them both to this one contest. It was like a regional thing, and it was the nobody else in my class submitted to it because they're like, I'm too lazy to do that. But I think that's another thing with me. Like anytime there was like a chance, I would go after it. Like you always take that lottery ticket because you might win.
Heck
and what I did, I submitted those 2 stories. It was such a weird contest because they're like, please send 2 stories of this length or whatever, and I'm like, okay, well, whatever. So I sent them, and it was weird. Like you had to get it notarized and everything.
What?
just to submit. Yeah, just to submit it in the mail and stuff. Like it was so weird. Like all the hoops you had to jump through. But like a month later, I get this email from somebody out in Pittsburgh, and they're like, hey, you're a finalist in the regional blah blah blah, and I'm like, wow. And they're like, yeah, please come to Pittsburgh for this event and everything like that. And I was like feeling so good about myself, like, because I was, I think, 20 years old at the time, and it's like, wow, I wrote these 2 stories, and somebody on the other side of the state recognizes them as something worth reading. And so like I won like a cash prize, and there was like a thing where they invited the top 3 finalists, and they were going to announce the winner and everything like that. and I was feeling like really good about it and everything like that. And I remember in the days leading up to it, I got like the worst sore throat of my life. It was just like, it was stupid. I think I was probably singing Guns N' Roses in the shower or something like that. And then, like, next thing you know, like, I can't even talk. And like, so like I had this, and it was terrible. And it was like I couldn't even speak. And I was supposed to read one of the stories at the ceremony. And I was like, oh man, what if this prevents me from winning? Yeah. And like this sore throat, it was so bad. And then literally as soon as I walk into the venue, it just kind of clears up. I don't know if it was adrenaline or what. And I went up there, I read the story, I nailed it, and then they announced the winner, and I got third place. So it was but I mean, you know what though, I'm glad I got third place, because if I had won that, I probably would have felt a little too good about myself.
Maybe, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think if you have too much success, I think that you get a little lazy, or you think, you know, you don't. But finishing in third, it was like, I didn't like finishing in third, but it was still something like I could be proud of, like being a finalist and all that. And then it also forced me to spend that following summer, you know, reading books on the craft, writing every single day, taking it seriously, and developing this habit of writing every day. And I do write every day. I haven't missed a day in like 12, 13 years.
Good for you.
Yeah, man, it's nuts, and like I think I have issues, but you know, it's like
it's a good thing. It's a good issue. If it's an issue, it's
other people are having your issues with you because of it. So
yeah. I mean, there are worse things you could do with every day of your life than, you know, writing something that you're passionate about. But I mean, stuff like that. So
yeah.
But Timothy and Daniel, I'm curious about you guys. What about, you know, have you had any of those darker moments, or even those, you know, you win like an award, or you win something that, you know, puts you on the right path?
Yeah, I can share. So I've always been interested in creative things and storytelling. As a kid, you know, it was Legos rather than the action figures, but a story quickly developed every time. You know, there was always a story. I dabbled in cartoons, animation, and then got really into filmmaking about 13. And so I spent about 13 years with the goal of working in the film industry. Got to the place where I was on shows. I was you know, low level, but like I was on things with people that you would recognize. Yeah. I wasn't doing anything important on them, but I was part of something that was somewhat important.
Right.
And I hit a wall. I reached a point where I realized to get to the place where I was expressing myself creatively through the film industry like I wanted to, it was going to be 30 to 40 years of my life before I could get to that point. And I completely walked away. I was like, I'm done. I can't do, I can't burn myself out like this for other people's visions over and over and over again before I get to do mine. And complete.
Yeah, you don't want to be living someone else's dream.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I completely walked away from film, but from everything creative for almost a year. For almost a year, I did nothing creative. And then one day, I was asked to share about something, and I was like, and I was thinking about reading a fairy tale, The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. Thank you. And the theme of it's like not keeping your gifts to yourself, but sharing. And so as I was like reading this story over and over again to prepare for like reading it out loud to this group of people, it kind of hit me like, if that's my theme, I'm going about this the wrong way. I should be sharing my story, not Oscar Wilde's story. And so like I was supposed to present it at the event at like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock the next morning, something like that. And I started writing probably at 10 p.m. And just within like 3 hours, I had this short story.
Is that Sticks and Stones?
That was Sticks and Stones.
Yeah, right on. We shared it. If you haven't watched it, go back and watch it. It's great. But yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead,
So Dan read it on our channel, but it felt so amazing. To write, to express myself, and to not have to get anybody's permission or cooperation or to sign off on it or to look at it and be like, no, I wanted it this way. Like, it was so liberating that I was like, this is it. I want to write. I want to write stories. And so it was probably about 6 months after that I started writing my first novel. Nice. And about that time is when we started this group. Yeah. So they've gotten to like follow my entire journey as a writer, pretty much.
And you said that was 13 years ago?
That would have been back in like
it was
2010.
That's awesome. You guys have stayed together as a group.
2010, something like that.
Yeah, I was in a group like maybe 2015 through like 2018ish, and we met like every Thursday, and then it just people started missing meetings, and I started missing, and then everybody just kind of
falls apart.
Yeah, it falls apart if you don't have that momentum, if you don't have that consistency.
And I think it's a friendship too, and a mutual respect, because I've been in, I think so. We started 13 years ago, and from that, then I was like jumping into other groups as well. Because I was just like, I want everything. I want to be a good writer, and so I'm like all over the place, like doing this.
You're so diligent. Really, like I mean that matters.
The all of the other groups fell apart for one reason or another, or 10 reasons or whatever. But this group has always stuck together, and we've always been sharing our stuff. And we'll take hiatuses. It's like Christmas, New Year's. It was like, oh, we know we're gonna take a huge break, and then we're gonna be like, hey, you wanna read some more stuff together, please? Like, but it was like we always took a hiatus, but then we'd always come back together, and it was like we couldn't like stop meeting, which was awesome. And we have a friendship. The three of us are good friends, and then we respect each other, and we're all over the world right now. We're all in different places, but we can't stop meeting, so it's fantastic. And we love it.
That is good. Oh man, because I have a lot of writer friends scattered all around, but not like that group dynamic. Like I have people who they come up clutch whenever I need somebody to beta read or something like that. Nice. But unfortunately, like that like weekly or monthly meeting, it's hard to pull it off. I'm part of the problem as well, because I can get super busy, and on top of that, sometimes when I'm working on a novel, I'm not looking to share one chapter at a time. Like I don't. Yeah, right. So and I typically just write novels now. I used to do a lot of short stories, but in recent years I've just shifted my focus pretty much entirely to novels, with the occasional short story if I'm just feeling burned out. So
So what is your? I'm curious. What is the first thing that you wrote? It doesn't have to be a book. It can be poetry or whatever. What was the first thing that you wrote and you were like, I'm super proud of this. Like this is really, really good.
I think going back to that short story I wrote in college, the one that was it was kind of like a 24 inspired thing. That was I felt really good about that.
How do you feel about it now?
Not so much. I wouldn't. It's not something I would hold up as like this great thing that I've written.
Right.
I will say though, one thing that I wrote when I was in grad school. So this would have been, I think, like 2012. I had been going through like kind of a dark time because I was going through like a transition phase, going from college to grad school, and then on top of that, like there were some health issues in my family, and there were all kinds of things going on. And I wrote this story called 10-Year Photo, and it was about this website where you can upload a photo of yourself and it'll show you what you look like in 10 years.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So the concept was there was 3 people. They were in a band together, and one uploads it, and then he sees himself with like gray hair, and he's like, wow, I go gray really fast. And then the other girl, she uploads her thing, or I think she was hesitant to upload hers, and the other guy uploaded his, and the other guy got an error message.
He's gonna die.
And well... We don't know that.
Right, but still, that's okay, cool.
Maybe. What does it mean? And then that was the first story I ever wrote where I felt like it was great. And
I like the premise.
Awesome.
It was. Thank you. Yeah, and it was one of those things where when and it was funny because I had a lot of homework or something I had to do that night, and it was just like, for some reason I had to write that story. It's kind of like Timothy, with you saying like how you felt like free in that moment where you just you just let it all out. You got that story, and that's what it was like for me, because I was really bogged down with different assignments and stuff like that, and then I had this idea for a story. Like I saw that vision of the error message and stuff like that, and I thought, that'd be pretty cool. What could I do with that? And then it was like 9 o'clock at night, and I'm like, I got a couple hours before bed. Let's test it out, see where it goes. And it flowed right out of me, and it was one of those kind of like major stepping stones for me, because it was easily the best story I wrote at that period of my life.
Nice.
And it actually it ended up getting published on the No Sleep podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
yeah, dude, that's great. I didn't know that.
I was blown away. Like my one buddy, he submitted there. He's like, yo, submit to No Sleep. They might take it. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, right. And, but like I said, I always take those lottery tickets, and sometimes you win, and that was one of those times I won. So
oh, that's fantastic.
yeah,
so
really fortunate.
So you talked a little bit about your process. What is your process, and has it changed since like from college to now? Like what is your process?
So, well, I write every day. That's key.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because writing is a hard thing to do, and I think if you don't force yourself to sit down, then it's too easy to do something easier.
Sure.
So
do
writing
you have
every
goal? Do you have a goal every day?
Yeah, I usually write for at least 2 hours, and if I'm drafting a novel, I aim for 3,000 words, and
nice.
like
Okay.
I try to hammer them out as fast as I can, so that like I just kind of get into like a flow state and everything like that. And I write like first thing in the morning, just again, because I think the longer you put it off, the easier it is to get distracted with other things, and it's like, oh, I don't want to write, I don't want to do this. And, but
I'm
with
tired
me,
now.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And I'm tired later, and I'm tired. Tired the next day and the next week. Yeah,
I'm always tired.
It doesn't really go away.
I know.
It's age.
I might
it's
as
just
well
age,
be dead.
man.
Yeah. But one thing I do when I'm in the drafting phase, I'll try to do 3,000 words a day, and then that pretty much will allow me to finish a 90,000 word draft in a month.
Yeah.
And
that's awesome.
Then I go into like this kind of pre-writing period for the next draft, and I try to like connect ideas, see what's working, see what's not working, and things like that. Once that is done, then I'll jump into like a second draft, and with the second draft, I usually have a pretty good idea where I want to go, but I always manage to screw it up, and that can be a good thing, because sometimes you get messy and you get creative at the same time. So
Yep. Oh yeah.
And then
So screwed up in the sense
that
of
part
like
of the process.
You feel like
like screwed up in the sense like for instance, right now I'm actually writing the sequel to Entry Wounds, and
oh, cool. I was gonna ask. That was a question that I had.
yes, and what happened was now I originally wrote this early last year, so like early 2023.
Right on.
And it was just something I was in between drafts of the Half Murders, so I wanted to reset the palette, freshen things up a little bit. So I'm like, I'm gonna give it a shot, see where it goes. And it was a mess, but I mean, it was a first draft, and I got to get a good feel for it.
Yeah.
And then once I finished up all my revisions and edits for the Half Murders, and I released it and everything, then it was time to get back into this Entry Wound, or this sequel to Entry Wounds. Mm-hmm. And so a couple weeks ago, I was doing a lot of pre-writing, figuring out what wasn't working. And I went through a list, like an Excel sheet. I listed out every chapter and like what happens in each chapter.
Yeah.
And I hammered that around for a couple days. And once I was finally done, I was like, okay, I'm going to start this next draft. So I start the next draft, and I think it was just yesterday or the day before, I realized that one of the POV characters just completely doesn't need to be there. Oh. And another POV character can be much more interesting if I play up a certain angle with them. So essentially, like, I had 3 POV characters. Like, one was the main character, Ken, and then there was another character who's in his group, who was like sort of like an ally, and then I had another one who was like kind of like a villain / anti-villain. And the villain / anti-villain was kind of detached from what was going on in the story, and I started to realize this.
Okay.
And so what I did was I just said to myself, okay, I'm going to just scrap that all together and focus on Ken and the other person and
Cool.
let that roll. Because I think if you ever can combine or cut things during the revision process, that's a good thing, because that means you're getting rid of excess, you're tightening things up, you're making things stronger. And it was something that with that third character, I was initially excited about him, and I thought like, oh, this is a cool idea for a character, and it can add all kinds of conflict and everything. But at the same time, that fact that they're detached, it's kind of like, you guys have seen Game of Thrones, right?
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have.
I haven't finished it.
Okay, so what always drove me nuts about Game of Thrones, and I'm not saying that it was poorly written or anything like that, but like Daenerys' storyline was always like disconnected from what was going on in Westeros.
Yep,
and it was like,
100%.
and you'd have like all these exciting things going on in Westeros, and it's like, Starks, Lannisters, Greyjoys, this and that, and then let's go over to Daenerys.
the sea, yeah.
Yeah, let's go over the sea and everything like that. And like, it's not that her storyline was bad or anything. It was just like, it was just disconnected from all that other
Like,
stuff.
what kind of weight does that actually have for the rest of the plot?
Yeah,
Right.
and you knew it would pay off at some point, but in the meantime, like when you're really engaged in those key storylines with the Starks and the Lannisters, and then it's like, hey, we're going over here, it feels almost like a commercial break in a sense, where it's like, oh man, we lose that intensity, and I mean, like, that's what I felt was going on with this sequel I'm working on, where it was like a Daenerys kind of thing, where like, yeah, that character is important, but at the same time, I can actually cut them out and have their sort of functions played out through other characters. And I think that's always a great thing to do. If you can, combine characters, have them, perform different plot roles, things like that. Huge difference it can make.
What do you think? What do you think Games of Thrones would look like if they only talked about Daenerys? We never saw her, but they're hearing the rise of this dragon, the mother of dragons, and Lannisters,
an interesting
and
thought.
like everything's going up. It's building, and then they're like, hey, but what about this queen? And they're like, no. Like, we don't even care. Like, Cersei's like, I don't even care about her. Like, like, whatever. But it's, like, building up. And you're not seeing her, but then it's building up. Like, it's almost like the White Walkers. Because they were building up. And they were only, like, we saw flashes of them, but we never saw them. And that was, like, so, like, incredible. And, like, super... And not to say we should change Game of Thrones. Like, Game of Thrones should change. No. But just think of that, like, thought process, or that, like, play around with it in your mind. Like, how much stronger or more mythical could Daenerys have been if we never saw her? Like, that's an interesting thought. That's really cool.
It is. The only problem with it is, though, we lose the key parts of her character, seeing her go from being this slave to being this queen. And I think if they'd simply hyped her up, then you lose that dimension 100%. To her character. So that's the only downside to it. And like I said, I mean, it's a good story. It's just I love those Westeros parts in the early seasons. Oh, absolutely.
Did you read the books, or did you?
I only read the first one. I never got too deep into it. Partially because I'm a very, very slow reader, and also partially because, like, once I got into the show, I was always like, okay, I've already know what happens and all that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm just curious if you had the same. Did you have the same feeling in the book that you did with the show? Like, did you feel like it was disconnected?
See, definitely in the book. Yeah, in the book, because like when you see the word Daenerys in the book, it's like, it's like, oh wow, things are really starting to get clicking all of a sudden, and it's like, now we got to go see Khaleesi and oddly enough, though, I didn't have the same problem with Jon Snow at the Wall, and
that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is some disconnect there, but it felt more immediate to me. Like, it felt like, I think, and it has a lot to do with, I'm sure, the fact that he's a Stark. Like, we see that connection in that first episode or the early chapters of the book, where we see him as a member of the Starks, and he goes to the Wall, and it feels like more just naturally connected to what's going on in Westeros, and
like he's still anchored there, and they can still get to him in a day or whatever. Like he's still there in their area, so he's still like in toil or still in the mix of their political shakeups and stuff. So interesting.
Yeah, I think that's why it worked more for me than like jumping to Daenerys' plot lines. But
So
yeah.
we started with this with process. So continue on your process. So you were writing your second draft, and you're seeing these characters, and so you're changing stuff. You're taking things out. Is that how you typically do your process, or is it like outline?
I like to get crazy in the first draft, and just I call it the gambler's draft sometimes, because you have things that you just roll the dice on, you see where it goes. It might look ridiculous, it might sound ridiculous, but if you take those risks, if you take enough risks, eventually you're going to hit something good. And the thing is, you can always change things later, so you might as well take risks early on.
Right.
When I wrote my first book, Bad Parts, there was a scenario that I came up with late in the book that was just completely off the wall. I never saw it coming, never planned for it or anything like that, but I carried it out, and it was like this big tragedy. And I thought to myself, like during the pre-writing stages before that second draft, I was like, I should probably build the story around this.
Cool.
Like have it as like either the midpoint or a later moment. And that ended up being one of the major events in the story that added a lot of drama later on. So same thing with like Entry Wounds and the Half Murders. There were always events that I'd be writing those early drafts, and I'd say to myself like, oh well, he could do this or she could do that, and how would that play out? I wonder. Let's go find out. And then it makes a mess, and you have to clean it up later. But I think when you make a mess, that's where true creativity comes from. Because if you do everything cookie cutter and by the book, you're never gonna write something like shocking or surprising. I mean, you gotta surprise yourself at some point.
I love how you started Entry Wounds 2. I thought as well, not 2, but Entry Wounds, the first book.
T.O. also.
And I love how messy that was, because it's like she comes in and she's just like, hey, and something's up, like right from the start. You're like, something's up, and she's like, hey, I want to let me talk to the manager. Hey, give me some sake, like whatever. And you're like, something's gonna go down, and then something goes down, and it's just like, whoa, how's she gonna get out of it? Like, what the heck is going on? Who is this person? We don't even know who she is, but this, like, I'm rooting for her, but I'm not rooting for her, but I am. But like, wait, what's going on? So it's like it's funny. The first draft, you make it Wild Wild West. You make it messy. You make the beginning of the book messy, and it's just like, here, we pick it up from here. And then even with Ken, like when Ken has his whole life and everything, it gets super messy, and then it's really fun. So it's like, it's funny that your stories are like mimicking like your method of making things messy, and then we'll see where it goes from there. And it's really cool, and I really
astute, Caleb. Yeah, it had to be said.
Thanks, Daniel. So do you use an editor when you write your stuff after you?
So before I release my books, I send. During the beta reading process, I send out to a bunch of my friends.
Sure.
2 of them are like editors. I just kind of lucked out into that. Like we were friends in college and stuff like that, and we all just kind of ended up doing our different things. My one buddy, he's a developmental editor. My other friend, she's a line editor. So I send him the stuff early on, and he just beats it up and tells me, oh, here's what sucks, this and that, and it's always soul crushing, and I always just kind of like sit in my chair and stare off into space for a couple days after that. But
you're like, I won't open this email yet until I'm in the right frame of mind.
It's a hard thing to look at, but and then usually when I get to like the later stages, after I've made some revisions, stuff like that, I'll send it to my other friend, and she will look at it. She's line editor, so she'll pick apart like different paragraphs and stuff like that. And then once I go through that, and once I make final revisions, final edits, I send it off to a copy editor who I pay. And she's just fantastic. She's just been absolutely incredible for me. And because there's only so much I can do before I start losing my mind in terms of spicing up my sentences and stuff like that. And then I'll send it over to her, and she'll send it back to me with the track changes on, and I can look back and forth. I'll be like, oh, that's so good. That's just
why didn't I come up with that?
I know why couldn't I think of something so such a great turn of phrase like that?
Right.
But she does such a great job, and she cuts out all the excess words and the silly stuff that I thought I needed in there but didn't. So
you're rejected, and then you're like, okay, what did it say? I got to rewrite it now.
The only thing I don't use a proofreader.
Okay.
I basically what I do once I get my book back from my copy editor, I will read it out loud.
Nice.
Because I'm thinking about the audiobook. I'm thinking
yeah.
about how is this going to sound coming out of a narrator's mouth. So I want to read it out loud, and as you're reading it out loud, you see the words, and if there is a typo, you'll usually find it.
Yep.
And on top of that, I also send it to like some family and friends, and I have them, hey, if you see any typos or any weird phrases or anything like that, point it out to me, and then we fix things up. So for me, like a copy or a proofreader, I mean, maybe there is value in that. I haven't tried, but I just, the way I do things with reading straight through
It's
it,
taken care of.
I don't really think I need it so much. So
Yeah. Your YouTube is fantastic.
Thank you.
Check it out. It's in the description. Like, if you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. Subscribe, like his stuff, and then like and subscribe our stuff too. But I love how you analyze everything. Like, you break it down. You break down shows. You break down stories. You break down all this stuff. Do you read or watch anything without analyzing it? Are you able to like disconnect and just like watch and enjoy?
It's like an occupational hazard at this point.
100%.
Yeah, because I just can't. I can't watch a movie without thinking of the structure.
Yep.
One thing,
yeah.
there is some good stuff though. If I read like comics or manga, or I play a video game.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Since those structures are, I don't even want to say they're different, but they're a little better hidden, I guess, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes I can get lost in those. Like,
That's awesome.
yeah, like if I'm reading, like Junji Ito is one of my favorite manga writers, and he writes like these really messed up like cosmic horror stories, and like,
Yeah.
like he'll just, he'll just like, something will happen, and it's just like,
Yep.
it just blows your mind, and like,
Yep.
I don't know. Also, like he's Japanese, so I don't know if there's like a different structure,
Sure.
like like in the eastern half of the world.
Uh-huh.
But and I think that also goes back to video games, where a lot of the ones I play are Japanese, and once again, you have maybe like a different structure to it. But
Yeah.
I mean, those are usually like when it comes to storytelling, I only get lost when I'm in like those kind of mediums, versus like if I'm reading a book or watching a movie or a TV series, I usually am thinking about how I'm going to analyze it, or
Yep.
whatever it is.
Oh yeah, definitely. I find the same way. Like, as soon as I started doing, so when I was young, I started writing stuff, like just like little things, like a total ripoff of Star Wars. I've shared this story on the channel already, but it was a total ripoff of Star Wars. Like, me and my brother were writing it, and then he like gave up on it, and I was like, well, I'm gonna finish this thing. And as I was writing it, like I would notice things in other movies and like TV shows and books and stuff, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. That's how they did that. Oh, and then as I just got more into the industry, especially when I got more into film, it was like I noticed everything, and I'm like,
Yeah.
ooh, I know how they flipped that car over. Oh, I know how they did this. Oh, I'm just like, wow, they did a really good job. Or wow, that was really bad. So I won't show it. Shout out any shade on any of those movies that did it bad. But yeah, it's definitely. It's hard to disconnect from the filmmaker or writer inside of you now, where it's like,
Oh, yeah.
wow, that's really cool, and it's like honoring the craft in a sense. Like, it's like a movie about movies. You're honoring the craft while doing a good job, So, but yeah, it's such an interesting thought for me. Like, and I know that it's not common to be able to disconnect yourself from it. So
Yeah, and I think I missed those days before I really got into writing. Like, I think what was the actual story that pushed me to I have to become a writer? It was The Dark Knight, and when I saw that in theaters, I saw it opening night, and I came in with like kind of low expectations. Like, I wasn't really paying attention to the hype or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it was just like I was working at a grocery store at the time, and my one buddy came up to me. He's like, "Hey, you want to go see Batman tonight?" I'm like, yeah, I guess. Like,
you're like, Heath Ledger's in that. I don't want to see that.
I'm like, yeah, I guess whatever. So so we went, and it was like we were really lucky, because it was me, my buddy Tom, and my friend Steph, and we were all. It was the three of us, and it was a packed theater, and somehow, some way, there were 3 empty seats in the smack dab in the middle of the theater, where you had like a great view of everything. And if I hadn't been right there, I would have had to been like up front, like looking at looking up at the screen and all that. But the moment that movie started, I knew something was up. I knew it was like it had awakened something in me. It was like, oh man, I have to become a writer now. And
that's
just,
awesome.
Yeah, it was, and that was like, I'm so fortunate that I didn't understand plot structure back then, because then I might have been sitting there thinking like, oh, I wonder what the third act twist is going to be, or what the,
exactly, yeah.
Well, that's an interesting midpoint. Yeah.
So when you write, so obviously you're influenced by film, you're influenced by television. Are you like, when you write, do you see your scenes as like plotted out as TV or movie scenes? Or do you just like, is it just like, no, this is just my writing? Is it different than that? Or are you seeing it as a movie?
I see them very visual, very visually. And you've read Entry Wounds, so I'm sure you've noticed how visual it can be at times. And I think that's the film TV influence on it. But I had always been most gripped by movies and TV growing up. With books, I've always been a slow reader, so that was always kind of a struggle for me. I did read tons of R.L. Stein as a kid, and then that was where like the horror influence came from. And then like I got into like Harry Potter and some other popular books at the time that were like aimed at like younger audiences, like Holes and like the Phantom Toll Booth, and there were a bunch of them.
That's a good one. That's one that's lost in time.
Yeah,
where I'm like, dude, this is great.
But interestingly enough, when I got like a little older, like I want to say like my teenage years, like I kind of drifted away from reading because it was so frustrating to me. And in high school, they give you like just the worst things that you could possibly read at that age. Like
I know.
When I was a freshman in high school, over the summer we had to read Animal Farm, which I was way too stupid to understand. Like there was no like that's a terrible book to give a 14-year-old. Like I had no clue what was going on. And then they also gave us Hound of the Baskervilles, which was pretty good.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
And then like then I remember we read some Bradbury my freshman year, and that was cool. Like I always liked like that darker stuff. But then they'd give you something like Silas Marner, and it's like I'm 16.
Which is a good
I don't want to
book.
read Silas Marner.
But
I know, I had nothing against it. But I mean, like when you're 16, like you're a kid, you're edgy, you want.
Right.
And like I think the book that really kind of rescued me was Catcher in the Rye, because when they that one just absolutely clicked with me. I know a lot of people hate it, but I loved it. And
I only hated it because it was required.
It was required for me, but it was so like, oh man, like it felt like having a friend in book form. And that was like toward the end of like my high school journey, where it was like, oh wow, this is exciting. I really like this. I'm really engaged by it. Why do I care about this? And like you start asking those questions, and then you're also kind of internalizing like how writing works and how your own style should work.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like school beats the love of reading out of you. I had the opposite, where I didn't read anything until like I was homeschooled, so I have a very weird upbringing.
So they literally
they didn't
the love of reading out of you.
They just beat me. They didn't beat anything. They just beat everything out of me. But they were. My parents had never pushed me to read, so I never read. And my friends would read R.L. Stein, and my parents were like, I don't want you reading that. And I'm like, what? Come on. And then they would have me read Moby Dick, and I'm like, what? So I hated reading until I got out of college. I had a professor who loved what I was writing and what I was making, and he like really pushed me to read a lot more Poe, and he had me like read The Old Man and the Sea and like all this like bunch of stuff, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. So I got out of college and I was like, well, I'm working in films every once in a while, and then I'm not, and then I'm like, well, what am I gonna do? Like I want to write scripts, so what should I read? And I was like, you know what, I really want to read Don Quixote. So I went to the library and got Don Quixote, and that was like the first one, and it really launched my reading. Like that was like the start of my journey, and now like I'm up to the point where I read and I listen to audiobooks, because I'm also a slow reader. So my audiobooks, like I can fly through them.
I do them at double speed. Yeah,
dude. Yes, I mean, and it's amazing, and you get through, you get all the information, and it's like so like lovely and amazing, and you get really really good readers. Like Daniel is a fantastic narrator, so if anybody wants to use him, he's amazing. But I get through like 100 books a year now, where I'm like, nice. I'm able to read.
I don't read all his books for him. Like he's actually reading.
Yeah, but I'm like reading and listening.
He just calls up Daniel and was like,
wanna
"Can
read
you
this
read
book."
Catcher in the Rye to me?"
Please, can you read this for me, please?
It's required.
Yeah, it's required. Yeah. To be in this
Oh,
group, you
right.
need to read Catcher in the Rye.
Required
It's funny.
read.
I did a book recommendation for 11/22/63,
Oh,
and I was
excellent.
showing. Oh, it's amazing, right? But I did Catcher in the Rye, and I hope people caught the connection. But I had Catcher in the Rye, and then I was like, oh wait, no, 11/22/63. Read this book, and then I kept like Catcher in the Rye kept coming up, But so inspirations, Catcher in the Rye, obviously. Do you have any other inspirations? Who do you read now? Who do you listen to now? Like,
So I think the best book I've read in the past year, it was super, super dark. It was called And the Devil Cried by Kristopher Triana. He writes like really nasty, nasty horror stories, and like he holds nothing back. Like I just envy his just ability to not care about what people think. Like this guy is just nasty. And the Devil Cried was about this mob hitman, and within like the first 5-10 pages, I was just like, what? You know, what are you doing? Like it was just it was so just nasty and savage, and like it gripped me, and it was something that like I felt like I hadn't read something like that in a long time, where I felt unsafe while reading it. And I think like another author I like who does stuff like that, like Richard Laymen. He's long dead. I think he died in like 2000, but he wrote like a lot of those type of pulpy horror stories, and some of them are just fantastic, and he usually has like a wild midpoint twist in there. Like you see it like it's playing out like a slasher, and then it goes in like a crazy different direction. But Richard Laymen, I really love his stuff. Like he's just, you know, he's kind of a guilty pleasure because it's so pulpy, but at the same time he's got some incredible like story ideas, and like the direction he's willing to take things. And I'd say like Laymen was definitely a big influence on me, because in my in my mid 20s, when I was like writing Bad Parts and Entry Wounds, I was reading a lot of Richard Laymen.
Yep.
And then of course Stephen King was a huge influence. Salem's Lot is probably my favorite book of all time.
That's awesome.
Love Salem's Lot. It was just one of those. I remember I was just walking by my local library one day, and I'm like, I think I should start reading Stephen King for some reason. I forget what it was, but like I just walked in there. I'm like, do you have any Stephen King? And she's like, yeah, bottom shelf. And I saw this little, chewed up paperback with some woman who had like vampire bite marks on her neck, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. And so I brought it home, and I couldn't tear myself away from it. And like even though I was like a slow reader, I was still like super,
totally
moving through
That
it.
says a lot.
Yeah. Have you read the Dark Tower series?
The first 3 books, yeah. I'm not really high on it, to be honest
Dude,
with
you gotta
love it?
Okay, you gotta finish it,
All
because it's his magnum opus, number 1.
Yeah.
So you just have to finish it. If you're a fan of his, you have to read. You just have to do it. And how Salem's Lot comes into play.
Oh yeah, I have heard about this. I think Father Callahan makes an appearance. Yeah.
So you gotta get into it. You just try to push
All right.
through.
I'll do it for the Salem's Lot references.
I got it recommended to me, the whole series, 3 times, and I was like, no, like it is such an undertaking. But
it is.
I finally did it, and I read the first book, and I was like, I don't know. And they were like, no, like
How
all
old
3
were
of the
you?
people
Let me
like
ask
got
that.
back to me, and they were like, come on.
Because I was 12.
20-something.
And after
you
the
were
first
12 when you
book, I
read-
was like, I don't think I should keep reading. I think I'm about to get in trouble. They're
The
gonna
first
know.
one, I had to force myself to finish the first book. Like
me too.
The
Me too.
Gunslinger was like it starts off great. Like the opening
Yes.
line
Right.
is just whew, wow.
Yes.
But as it goes on and on, it's just like, oh my, and like I get that he's setting up the world building and everything,
Yeah.
but like at the same time, I want a more like traditional story out of
Sure.
it.
Yep.
And then the second book, like somebody was like, you have to try the second book, and I'm like, okay. And I liked the parts with, I think it was Eddie.
Yep,
when
Eddie's amazing.
He's trying to. I think he was working as like a drug mule or something
Yeah,
like that.
and so he's like putting it in one world and like coming back, and you're like, I don't have any
That
drugs.
was really
and then go
clever,
back.
yeah.
It's so
And-
good.
And then the stuff with Odessa was pretty good. And then
Yep.
toward the end, I forget who like the third character was, but I was kind of like tuning out at that point for some reason.
Is Jake from the first book, who
Okay.
died?
Yeah,
dude,
okay.
it's. I
Thanks,
mean,
Then they
Caleb.
brought him back in the third, right?
Yeah, well, they brought him back in the second one, and the third. You gotta just watch.
Yeah.
If anything, listen to the audiobooks. The audiobooks are really well done. They're well.
Or call up Daniel and he'll read
Yeah.
it.
Or yeah, Daniel, you gotta
Required,
read it
yeah.
and then just record it. But no, it's really, really good. I highly recommend it. I just finished rereading it like 2 weeks ago, and listening to it.
Yeah.
And it is so good. I can't recommend it enough. There are a couple of things that I don't like about it in the whole overall story, but it is fantastic. It is definitely his magnum opus. I highly recommend it. Sorry,
I'll
that's
have to get on
side.
4 through 7 then.
Yeah, definitely, and just get like a recap. I think that he does recap it.
The audiobook, I remember the one audiobook started with a recap. I think the third one did. Yeah, third one started with a recap.
Try that. And it's interesting too because he wrote half of it in the 70s or 80s, and then he waited 20 years and then picked it up again because he was like, I'm not ready to finish this. Yeah, so it's like it like blows my mind just that. So like while I'm reading it, I'm thinking like, dude, he wrote this when he was so young. And then I get to the next one and I'm like, and then he wrote it like so much older. Like it's so good. It's really
I don't know how you can keep all that in your head and you know,
idea.
keep all those, juggling all those balls in the air and not, forgetting like not just the details but also like the emotional push and like the feel of the story world and 20 years later, like that's just outrageous.
Well, let's get Stephen King on here, and we'll ask
Yeah,
him.
I know.
We'll have you come on, Brandon. You can be a guest host, and we'll just talk to him. Why aren't you writing more, Stephen? Like, why don't you write?
Yeah, I know. 2 books a year isn't enough,
2 books a year.
Yeah,
I wish I could get 1 book a
that's
year.
pathetic.
Golly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really.
I wish I could get 1 a year. When I first released Bad Parts back in 2020, the goal was to release a book each year.
Oh, right on.
2021 I released Entry Wounds, and
Nice.
in 2022 I was hoping to release a sequel to Bad Parts.
Yeah.
And what happened was I had such a nightmare with the process. I struggled so much with it. I kept trying to force it where it wasn't there. And I think when you force a story, it's destined to fall apart.
bad.
Thank you.
There's just no way around it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I worked on it for like I think I want to say I worked on it for about 2 years, and I finished it about the middle of 2022, and that was when I sent it to my one editor friend Vic, the guy who he beats up my stories.
Yeah. Nice.
And
His name is Vic. Give me a story now. I'm sorry. He just sounds.
but I sent it to him, and I was so used to him just like knocking it around, being harsh on it. And instead what happened was he's like, yeah, I think this is good. I think this can work. And I was like, as soon as I saw that, it was like a situation where like, oh man, I had no clue what I was going to do.
Yep. Oh man. Oh no. What do you think it was? Like, I'm sorry. So what did you do after that with it?
I scrapped it. So it was a situation where I think what happened was I had come to the point where I realized that it was just not worth it. It was sucking the life out of me, and like I felt so like, oh man, what am I gonna do? Like, like I just invested all this time in it, but I hate it so much. And then what happened was there was like a situation where I came up with this idea for the Half Murders, I think the year before, and I was like, maybe I'll revisit it. I'll figure something out as far as what I'm going to do in terms of how do I want to go back at the Half Murders. And I think the actual good thing about Bad Parts 2 was it put me in this mindset where I was so frustrated with myself that I ended up writing a book about a character who was frustrated with himself. So the Half Murders, what's it about? Yeah, what it's about a I actually have it right here. Hold on a second.
Nice.
But,
Yes, plug the book.
But basically it's about a woman and her daughter, and they go into this haunted house. They get chopped in half at the waist, and when they wake up next to these doppelgangers, and they're not sure what's going on as far as what just happened and everything like that. And they figure out there's something going on with this house, and there's a history to it, a dark history. They have to unravel the history, and at the same time they're being tracked by a woman who has hunted or who's been they're being like basically like harassed by somebody who the main character pissed off years ago. So it's a situation where you have this doppelganger, and on top of that you have this external conflict from another source. And the core story, however, was all about me figuring out, like, okay, what do I do in terms of how do I take that emotion, that personal frustration, and how do I go about telling a story from it, bringing this half murders idea and having something, some kind of emotional fuel that makes it work.
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was, but I mean, it was like, as far as, we talked about earlier in the video, falling apart, picking things back up.
Yeah.
It would just be like, after all the failures I had with Bad Parts 2, it was so frustrating, and it was like, I really started like questioning, like, wow, am I only capable of writing those 2 books, like Bad Parts and Entry Wounds? Because I was seriously starting to think, like, they were just flukes, because it was like a situation where, you had a lot of great ideas in like a certain point in time. I think it was like between like 2016 and 2019, and then you get into the middle of 2022, and you haven't really come up with a good book idea in a while, or come up with a good book in general. Right. And at that point, the Half Murders was kind of like, the battle for my soul, or my career, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it was a dark time. But I mean, I fought through it, and I learned to accept that. Yeah, hey, not every book is going to work out, and thankfully I didn't, force myself to go through more drafts of Bad Parts 2.
Right. Yeah. Dude, that's crazy though. Yeah. Like, to me, I haven't thrown out a book yet. I've stopped books and like worked on another idea or whatever, but I haven't thrown out a book yet. That's wild. That makes me scared.
It happens. It was just, I had this bad mentality. When I had been writing Bad Parts, I won this contest called Pitch Wars, and when I got into the contest, I was basically like, you submitted a finished manuscript, and if you got selected by one of the mentors, you got to work with the mentor for like 2 months and stuff like that, and you also got to hang out with all the other people who were winners as well. So it was like this Facebook group, and I remember one day somebody was talking about how a series is what sells, like standalone books don't sell and everything like that, and I got this idea in my head where I had to turn Bad Parts into a trilogy or a series or whatever it was, and like, I'd never intended to. I mean, there was certainly, the way Bad Parts ends, there's certainly questions that it raises, and there's possibilities and things like that, but it was never like, oh man, I have to write a sequel, I can't wait to write a sequel, and instead I ended up forcing myself to do it. So but I mean, that's just frustrating. And then
interesting.
Yeah.
Which I have to say, there are a lot of series out there that I wish the author had stopped.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the later books kind of ruined the first one, even though the first one's really great.
Yeah, if you stretch things out, sometimes it just devalues the first book. So yeah, you got to be careful with that. But oddly enough, with Entry Wounds, I never said I was going to do a sequel to it until I actually sat down one day and started writing it. So, and
until you started writing the sequel?
Yeah, because like, people think, like, based on the ending of Entry Wounds, that I had always planned for there to be a sequel, and like, like there's certainly like the ending is open, but
it could be an end. It could you're not sitting there thinking like, oh no.
Yeah, it could, like, in my mind, I ended it on a note where like the reader could finish the book and picture what happens with the characters after the fact. So
yeah. But it ended up turning into another book. Like, when did you get that? When did you get that bug to like write that?
Right after I finished the I think it was like the second or third draft of the Half Murders, and I sent it off to my buddy for him to beat it up. And then it was a situation where I just felt like, I think I'm ready to write a sequel to Entry Wounds. I don't know why I feel this way, but it was just there. And now I'm just trying to
get back into Ken's head.
Yeah, and like, I of the 3 books I've written and released, Entry Wounds was by far my favorite. It was like Bad Parts was a learning experience. The Half Murders was like, there was a lot of demons I had to purge, but with Entry Wounds, it was so fun and easy to write. And I mean, don't know if Timothy and Daniel are familiar, but the concept is it's about a haunted gun that if you pick it up, you can't put it down till you kill 6 people with it. And
it's intense.
Yeah. So like the whole killing 6 people thing just made it so easy to figure out what needed to happen in the book. Like the book basically wrote itself based on the concept. So
you have direction.
I had that direction. Whereas with the other 2 books I've written, it was more open ended, and that required me to make more choices during the drafting process. But
yeah, I mean, one of the things that really drew me into Entry Wounds was the way that the gun had a personality without ever saying anything or doing anything. It reminded me of the One Ring from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
You know, it's very much like I am now bonded to this thing and I can't do anything without it. And then it like the way that it influences the holder is like, so it's very, very cool.
Which
and
is a cool...
I really, really liked that aspect.
Yeah, there's a lot to respect there, because like in filmmaking, they tell you like what you learn about a character is how others react to them. Not what they say, not even what they do, but how others feel about them, like coming into the room, like out of the gate. And so the fact that the gun has a personality, and that you can tell that it has a personality, and you know what it is, without it speaking or doing, which is like the D&D version of it, basically. It's like the talking sword, like whatever.
Yeah.
But like yours is cooler. I haven't read it, but it's cooler.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah.
But I will now.
It is, and there's tension throughout. Like, it makes tension throughout the whole story. Like, it wasn't like, oh, well, okay, here's the down part. It's like, no, the dude's still holding on a gun and he's hiding it. So the cop comes and knocks on the door and is like, hey, and he's like, hey, what's up? like it's really cool. There's great tension. Highly recommend it. You should definitely check it out.
I will.
But yeah,
I know you're only talking to me. I'll check it out.
Yeah, no, I'm talking to everybody.
I know.
Timothy and I, we're just spectators. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just...
So, something I've been struggling with my kid. I love him so much, and there's so much to love there. You always worry for your kid. Whenever you have the opportunity to worry, you'll worry. Even if you're not a worrier, because you care. So, he is very dramatic. He loves drama. He loves conflict. And so he's always into, like, if other kids start talking about dinosaurs, he's like, well, did you realize there's this one creature that's prehistoric that's even scarier? Because he wants to watch the YouTube video about, what's even creepier, what's even scarier. And it's like, and he wants to watch all this other creepy stuff, and he wants me to tell him, like, we started out telling bedtime stories, like any family does, but then, like, he wants the story to be, and what about the ghost? And I'm like, there is no ghost in this story. And he's like, well, there is. And then he starts telling me, like, so where I'm going with this is, like, I'm actually encouraged, having watched some of your YouTube videos, and kind of getting a grasp of your character. And if you'll forgive the presumption, it feels like you've kind of made a brand out of, like, understanding or looking at evil, looking at fear, looking at these things, kind of like Stephen King, and some of these others that you've talked about as your inspirations. Yet it's not like you don't have a grasp of the good, and it's not like you have, that doesn't define you as a person. It's more like you're exploring not just options, but you're exploring your possibility, you're exploring an avenue. Like, it's more of a what if, like, and like Plato would say, well, there are kind of 2 versions of what he says, but one version of what Plato says is the more time you spend with evil, you become evil, and the more time you spend with good, you become good. And so that's my fear as a parent, right?
The longer you look into the abyss.
Yeah.
That's not what's happened with you,
Yeah,
as far as I can tell. And that's really encouraging to me. So, like, I can encourage him to be creative and enjoy the conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's something to be said about getting it out of your system, so to speak, like your dark thoughts, your dark, like again with like the half murders, like there was that self-hatred that I was dealing with, and exploring that in a dark and horrifying way helped me overcome it, and helped me grapple with it and forgive myself for failing to write bad parts too. So yeah, and I mean I think just we're drawn to the dark and the light because people are dark and light. I mean, we're just we're good and bad, and it's always going to be more complex than just one way or another. I mean, I'm not a parent, so I don't really have to worry about like, oh, what is my kid gonna be, what is my kid reading or watching or this or that. But like, I mean, I understand the concern. Like you fear the worst if like, oh well, my kid's into serial killers, maybe he'll be a serial killer or something like that.
That hasn't happened yet.
But yeah.
He's pretty young. Someday. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think when I was super young, I was always drawn to like Halloween time and like monsters and stuff like that. And I ended up reading a lot of R.L. Stine when I was a little kid. So, I think it's just maybe there's something about the scary that draws kids toward it. And I think I remember a friend of mine, a psychologist, was talking about. She said something that like little kids like scary things because I think it has something to do with the fact that everything is scary to them, and then when they see like a scary story, it's like in a safer, contained environment.
Right.
Yes.
Something
So
embodies
I was
it
gonna
for
say
them.
I've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
So that,
Yeah, so that would explain why it would be like, like why are kids so drawn to monsters and all that? So
Because they're scared all the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
yeah,
like
and they're scared all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're in a safe place so that it's almost like cathartic. You can read something or hear a story that's scary with a resolve,
and there's a
it
formula
scares you,
whereby
but it's not.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
And
so
I think
then
it teaches you what to do with your fear,
Yeah.
how to
Oh,
handle
sure.
your
Oh,
fear
absolutely.
Yep.
in a
Yep.
safe environment.
Yep.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. I mean, stories they're learning tools. I mean, they teach us how to live. So yeah.
100%. Oh, I love that. I love that. That's Brandon. What as we close, tell us how can we support you? Like how can we and how can people watchers? How can we support you? What are you working on? And what are you listening to or reading or watching?
Okay, so you can support me by following me on YouTube, subscribing, liking. You can also support me on Patreon, Writer Brandon McNulty. Writer Brandon McNulty is my YouTube channel. You can also find me on Patreon there as well. As far as you can also support me by buying my books. Again,
Yes.
Half Murders is cool if you like horror stories about haunted houses. And then Bad Parts, you might like it if you like stories about people trading away their sick and injured body parts in order to get healthy again. And then Entry Wounds, we already talked about this with the haunted gun. You pick it up, you can't put it down until you kill 6 people with it. So if you're into thrillers, horror stories, darker stuff, you'll enjoy my books. And let's see, and that as far as support, that'd probably be the key things there. And as for what I'm working on, I talked about Entry Wounds too, but I'm also writing a book on writing right now. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, I'm hoping to release that by the end of the year. It's basically just going to go into like the key elements of storytelling, like
Nice.
character, plot, theme, and I have 8 different elements that I'll be discussing in like each like chapter by chapter and everything. And like I really want to keep things simple because my audience has come to expect that like, okay, well, Brandon's videos make things easier. They
Super easy.
take like a complex idea and make it easy to digest. So keep an eye out for that. I'm hoping to release it December or January if it takes a little extra time, but I might be reading the audiobook because like people like I mentioned it to a couple people like just like in like comment sections of the videos, and they're like, oh, I hope you read the audiobook. I'm like, oh, like I don't want to, but I mean if people are that well it's because
It gives a connection.
Yeah.
Like
It
like
does.
you wrote this, so you're
Yeah.
reading it. It's like
It is kinda
Stephen
cool.
King,
especially with nonfiction, especially. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, definitely.
You could also post Daniel's phone number and just tell him to call.
But they want you, so give
Yeah,
them.
I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm probably going to end up doing the audiobook. I'm going to have
Right
to
on,
learn
yeah.
how to go through all that. I mean, again, I don't want to.
Lots of water.
I just want to be, I want to be left
Yeah.
alone.
Lots of water. Right, exactly. You just want to write it, be done with it. But
Yeah.
like Stephen King did that. He reads some of his fiction, and it's not always good at all. But then when he did it on writing, it's amazing. Like, so if you're into like listening to audiobooks about writing, get Stephen King's on writing as well. So, but yeah.
And was that it? I think that.
And then the last thing, like, what are you reading or listening to or watching? Like, what do you?
So I just finished watching Tokyo Vice.
Oh, cool. Was it
yeah,
good?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Cool.
I actually read the book years ago when I was
wow.
writing Entry Wounds, because Entry Wounds involves like the Yakuza and stuff like that. So I wanted to learn as much as I could about different crime groups and stuff like that. And somebody told me the TV series was great, and it was very different from the book because it was more focused on just being like a thriller series. But I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think as far as what I'm reading right now, I'm actually reading The Misenchanted Sword. I forget the author's name, but somebody told me about it recently because I mentioned Entry Wounds to them, like the whole haunted gun concept, and somebody's like, "Oh, that reminds me of The Misenchanted Sword," and it's like, it's this. It was written in the '80s, and it's a book like I guess. What happens is there's this soldier, and he's a swordsman and stuff like that, and he gets like taken away from his group, and then he stumbles on this sorcerer, and the sorcerer casts a spell over the sword so that like once he pulls it from the sheath, then all of a sudden he can't it can't be removed from his body, although he can move it to different parts of his body. So it's pretty wild. But
interesting.
I'm working my way through that right now, and just seeing if it could give me some ideas for the Entry Wounds sequel.
Awesome. Oh, very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you
for having me.
It was a joy. That was awesome. That was really, really fun. I really appreciate it. So go support Brandon. Check out his YouTube, Patreon. Buy his books. Entry Wounds was great. Highly recommend it. And join us again next time for our next episode. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Hi. If you enjoyed that, then maybe you should watch this. Or maybe it's on this side. I don't know. I don't know how this works.